Hello, I hope this finds you in good spirits. My name is Greg Ingham of Media Clash, publisher of Exeter Living. Welcome to our third Exeter Living Business Club, Emerging into the New World, candid insights from disparate sectors on how we're seeking to navigate through and respond to these continuingly strange times, whether personally, professionally or managerially. These are times when we can all do with help and advice, and hearing other people's experiences and how their clients and themselves are responding to these times in the weeks and months to come. So at last, in this great pause, we've seen some signs of businesses coming back, cautiously taking those important first few steps, and on the whole have been responding very, very capably and thoughtfully to that in terms of social exclusion, social distancing, and so on. We shall see how it develops. Our take is very much that what we think now will not be what we think in, say, 10 weeks' time or some such, when the world will have changed again, and we will all be used each time to the place where we find ourselves at that point. Business will of itself over time begin to recover as we get simply more used to traversing our city once more. Please also look out for our doors are open, the Exeter Living campaign we've been running through social media to help encourage awareness of shops and hospitality places which are indeed once more open. Check also our Friday weekly newsletters, which are a good way to promote your own activities, whatever your opening up might be, or your new business offerings and so on. Although this focus initially has been on those businesses reopening, many businesses have continued trading in whichever form, particularly professional services. We'll be holding Exeter Living business surgeries on such topics as employment and HR, financial planning, digital marketing, legal services, and much more. And if you have a professional service which the businesses and people of Exeter would benefit from, please do talk to us and we can act as a showcase for that service. We seek to have expert advice provided for free on key topics, both live at these webinars, but also subsequently on our Exeter Living YouTube channel, as this one will be published shortly. Good luck, good wisdom to all Exeter businesses. Two more things before we start. One, look out for the Exeter Property Awards. Comms on that very soon. It's a major celebration of all aspects of the sector, from resi to commercial, from architects to agents, from legal to financial, developers, suppliers, everyone in that value chain. And it's headline sponsored, we're delighted to say, by Close Brothers, and our thanks to them. And the really big news for us is that Exeter Living is returning to rude good health, we hope. It's just a little over 10 weeks until we'll be back, and we just cannot wait. Our first issue will be on October 2nd, and as I say, the world may be feeling rather different at that point. It'll be faintly autumnal. In theory, the kids will be back to school and so on, and business will be being rekindled in different forms in between now and then, and we hope we'll be in a good place for us to chronicle all that's great about the city. Like all businesses, all independent local businesses particularly, we've been touched by the support that the business community here in Exeter has given us. We're all flesh and blood, we're all in the same storm, albeit in different boats, and we're all in need of buoying up, and thank you for your response to our announcement news. We are absolutely determined with Exeter Living to play our part to the absolute full in this new world, celebrating the best of the city, promoting the businesses, galvanizing business thinking where we can, providing help and insight, perhaps such as today, and maintaining what we hope is a plausibly positive tone, giving reassurance about what is happening in Exeter. Hashtag Exeter together, we can promote the city and all the good that is happening out there for all our mutual benefit. On to our speakers today. We'll be hearing in this order from Sam Mackenzie-Green of the Devon County Show, Roger Wilkinson of Wilkinson Grant, Stephen Marshall of the Met Office, and Jaye Cowle of Launch Online. If I could ask Sam to come forward, and I'll just explain how we're going to be operating. Short interviews with each, and please do send your questions through. Good morning, Sam. Hello. Yeah, do send your questions through using the Q&A button below, but I've got quite a lot already that we want to ask each of our panellists. We'll cover as many as we can. So Sam, first up, how are you and how have you been navigating this lockdown personally?
Well, I think I'm very well. We've had no one in my family has had COVID, so we've managed to avoid it so far. I've got two children, boys who are 12 and 9, so they've been at home being homeschooled, which has been interesting and challenging. But otherwise, I think we're just incredibly appreciative that we live in a part of the world where we've got lots of outdoor space and that the weather has been nice. And my garden's probably never looked better. So like many people, I think, I've been benefiting from having some time at home.
If ever there were a time for a pandemic, and there really isn't any time that's good for a pandemic, I guess the spring and reasonable weather, and yes, this part of the world is about the best that it might be. But for you with the Devon County show, you had to take that decision. When do you take the decision to cancel? That was in March, early March?
Well, in March, when things were really starting to look a bit bleak for events for a start, we took the decision to postpone the show to August, to late August, thinking that that would be a time when hopefully things would have sort of settled down and we could run a successful show. Because effectively cancelling the show is financially tough for us. And being able to postpone it meant that we could roll over costs that we'd already incurred and hope to run it. But as time went on, that became less and less likely. We were then caught up in negotiations with the government over bringing a Nightingale Hospital to the showground. So that took up about a month of our time negotiating with them, trying to work out a way that could work. And then they were hoping to have that Nightingale Hospital. They wanted it for 2 months. Then they asked us for a 2-year contract, which of course then became much more difficult for us to be able to fulfill. And effectively, essentially that then went away. We then refocused on whether we could run the show in August and took the decision to cancel. So it was April by the time we'd really finally put the nail in the coffin of this year's Devon County show.
That's a very sad image, a nail in the coffin. It must have been, this is an emotional time for us all, but particularly for those in events when you've got an annual event and all the months and hours and God knows what of planning and hope and communications and so on, for it to be dashed entirely outside your ability to control. How was that personally for you? That's sort of your life was putting on that show, and then it suddenly wasn't there.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. You don't get that show. We won't get that show back. And plans, we'd had a great show last year. So the build up for this year's show had been really positive. We were looking at record numbers of trade stands and sponsors and things. And what made it absolutely worse was the weekend was fabulous. The weather was perfect. I would have liked it to have rained all week. If it had rained all week, I'd have felt a lot better about it, but it didn't. And so we know we would have had another cracking show. And being a May show, that's not always the case for us. Weather is always iffy. So actually to have had 3 good days, which is what happened, was pretty gutting, to be honest.
What about the support you've received, and then also perhaps come into the financial side? I mean, clearly this is absolutely, dare I say, disastrous financially. Mm. How do you cope with that financially, but also what support, perhaps morale boosting support, have you received?
Well, I think that, I mean, our show works with the core team of staff, but effectively we're a charity that's run by our trustees and relies heavily on our wider family of volunteers. And they have all been fantastically supportive of the decision to cancel, but also supportive of, telling us how important the show is to them, which kind of makes us feel that, people haven't forgotten us and that the show is a worthwhile event that people really enjoy. And over show weekend, or what would have been show weekend, we had lots of messages from people, saying how much they missed it and how it's such a highlight for them normally in the year. So I think that was great to receive that kind of support from people, that even in a difficult time, they were still thinking of the show and thinking about what a great event it is and how much it brings to so many people's lives.
But the charity itself has the reserves in order to be able to get through this. It can navigate its way through.
Well, we don't particularly have the reserves. Last year we spent $750,000 re-roofing the West Point building, which was 30 years old. So our reserves have been depleted on that project. So we weren't expecting this to happen. But we do own the showground, and we have lettings here, and But our events business, which, as you know, runs all year round and is what shores up of the association with different events running and hiring our facilities, has been wiped out as well as the show. So our income base has gone. We know we've been able to benefit from the furlough scheme, which has been excellent for us, and we've been able to furlough a large percentage of our staff. But it will leave us with a significant loss at the end of the year, which we will have to hope to try and recover.
Well, always trying to take the positives where we can. I suppose the one possible positive is that you've had yet more time to think about 2021. And I wonder if you could give us a flavour of what we all might expect. Any new things you can reveal?
Well, I think at this stage we aren't really looking at what new things we can do. We're trying to understand what a show next year might look like. We've had no shows this summer. No one's been able to run an outdoor event of any significant size, and we're now into late July, August. I don't think we're going to see very many, if any, large outdoor events this summer. Of course, we're at the beginning of the season next year in May. We are considering what that really is going to look like for us, and are we going to be able to run a show? For starters, do we think that a show in May next year is possible? And if it is, will there be the consumer confidence to come out and support the show? Obviously, the size and scale of the show we can put on depends on the support we feel we're going to get in terms of income.
If I could press you to answer some of your own questions, do you think, will you be able to run a similar scale event next May? Is that your working assumption?
I think that we will probably be able to run a similar sized event, but we may have to look at cutting some costs in order to reflect what might be, say, a 75 to 80% of our usual crowd, because whether people will have the confidence to come out to large events next spring and support them. We also have to consider a large proportion of our income comes from our traders. Those 600 traders that support us, will they still be in business next year? They've had a season without shows. Have they found other ways to promote their goods and services? So we could be looking at a reduction in income both on trade stands and on visitor numbers, and we have to cut our cloth accordingly.
Well, I suppose next May is whatever it is. It's 10 months away or so. Human beings are endlessly adaptable. None of us would have thought 10 weeks back, let alone 10 months back, we would be where we are. And who knows what the spring might bring. If I could just make if not a plea, a request to everyone watching this, that the Devon County Show is incredibly important. It's an iconic event. It does so much for the culture as well as the business of the area. If companies are able to stand behind it and support it, I'm sure Sam and the team would very much appreciate that. It is extremely important that we all help each other get more confidence to the extent we can, whilst observing all the social distancing and all the other strictures. Sam, really, really good luck in piloting the way through here.
Thank you.
Back to the panel session in a moment, but for now, thank you.
Thank you.
Roger Wilkinson, if we could have you step forward.
Here we go.
Good morning to you. Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm good, Greg. Good. Surprisingly good. A little bit overcast here in Exeter today, but we're feeling quite perky.
Yeah, it's a little bit brighter here in Kingswear, but we all look at the weather and take it's like a Rorschach test of personality, isn't it, or something?
A little bit.
So how have you been in these strange times? You're a gregarious man, and you've been somewhat constrained.
A little bit, yes. In fact, after, I don't know, do the old man bit, but I've been in property for about 45 years, or it seems longer than that. And I've always been used to working with lots of people, lots of interactions, lots of business, social interactions, working from home. Looking out across the garden, lovely, but without that direct interaction, it's been quite odd. And candidly, at a personal level, it does put a little bit of a strain on you.
Yeah. Well, if I could ask on that personal front, I mean, we've all been pressurised, and this is, there's no secrets here at all. We're all pressurised by lockdown. What would have been your personal releases of that pressure?
I haven't, candidly, I don't want to be a bleeding heart, but looking back, I probably haven't handled it as well as I could, because I've just immersed myself into my work, which is probably not the best thing to do 24/7. It's been good for the business, but now I'm feeling that maybe I should just invest in a little bit of me time to recharge, to get on and support the rest of my colleagues even more.
Well, it's very open of you to say so. I suspect, knowing several of your colleagues would think you're almost protesting too much there, but that's for them to opine at some stage. But just thinking back, you mentioned your several years in business. Have you ever experienced anything even faintly comparable to this?
Not even close, and this isn't about the recession or whatever's ahead of us, but the experience of what is a people business. People say, I love property, but I love people. It happens to be that property is what we trade in. And no, nothing ever, and hopefully nothing ever like it will ever happen again. It has actually made me look late in my career very closely at the business, which, along with many other businesses, most other businesses, were having to sort of rebuild from the bottom up, learning new ways and new technologies very, very quickly. So that's been both challenging and exciting. Including
virtual viewings, presumably, in the earlier stage at least.
Frankly, they were a bit of a gimmick before, the virtual tours, and that's not just my opinion, it's those of most people in the industry, but it's judged by the number of eyeballs you actually see looking at virtual tours, and there were very, very few, quite honestly. The drop-off rate was enormous. The whole thing's turned on its head. Not only have the government said that we must qualify people before they go and have a look at property, but they really should have that virtual viewing and accompanied online viewing, which has been transformational to our business. It's been, I can't overstate it, it's probably been the single most effective tool that we've both built and exploited in the last 2 months.
Yeah. Tell us about both your business, but the slightly wider property sector. That clearly it was on hold, but it's now flowing. Talk us through how.
Unfortunately, for most businesses in property, the start of this year was really quite strong. In most, let's stick to Exeter and surrounding area, but it was across the country, but particularly here. So, no less so here in Exeter. So there was a bit of momentum, combined with actually, candidly, a lack of awareness as to what was going to happen. The perception was that ever the optimist that things would just battle on through. That came to a grinding halt across the sector, along with everybody else at the announcement of lockdown. But what was pleasing, and not just with us, but I believe a number of other property-related businesses, is that momentum stayed and it powered through the first month of lockdown. People were caught mid-transaction, and very, very few put things on hold, very few, and the majority were just driven to get the deals across the line and to move things on. And that will have helped most property businesses just top up the coffers before what then was to follow. And given that most businesses are going to operate on maybe 10-20% margins, take 2 or 3 months income out of any business, and the picture looks dramatically different. Saying that, just racing on, after learning those new tools, adopting new technologies and new methods of working, when it wasn't the Chancellor, when the government lifted the restrictions on the property sector, it really did open with, this isn't just hype, it opened with a boom. It was like taking the cork out of a bottle, and it's powered on through. It's been the same for the last 2 months.
Can you talk about each aspect of the volumes of instructions, valuations, and how they have changed or not, sort of year on year, or where you might otherwise have expected, and then also the volume of transactions? It's perhaps a little bit early on the transaction side, but just talk us through those sort of 3 stages of what you've experienced.
So virtual valuations have been interesting. before the middle of May, we weren't allowed to obviously go into people's properties, and it was interesting how well all generations of homeowners embraced technology and still wanted us to invite us into their homes virtually to talk through, and that engagement, not just looking at the property, but the interaction, even that we're having now, at a personal level with somebody in their living room, you begin to build relationships in a different way. So that was very interesting. In terms of listing properties, that was a little bit harder, but we were listing properties that we really hadn't been to see, or we may have been invalued, but we were just launching with skinny details. People were not buying, but making all the moves to try and progress their property searches. So that was an interesting experience. But in terms of volumes, no. The one thing that people often ask us about is prices. So let me just step in on that. There's a school of thought that perhaps they've gone up about, they've probably gone up 10% in the 2 years from Brexit being announced, and they were probably high enough, but still low compared to other parts of the country. And those prices have held. There was a question mark of when the cork was taken out of the bottle, whether people would be cautious, buyers would be cautious on prices and values. But we're privileged. We're lucky. We're lucky in this part. We're in this part of the country, excuse me, I'm losing my voice. Prices are holding up. Transaction numbers are holding up. But it's stock levels that will determine most markets. If there's an oversupply and lack of demand, but the demand is high and the supply is fairly steady. Our team will be saying it's more than very steady. They're flat out.
And broadly, your expectations for 2021, it's, you know, in some ways it's an awful long way away, but it's just around the corner, really. What do you expect?
We talked about looking back, if we experienced anything like this before, but people would assume that with recessions that property values go down. They don't necessarily, and nor do transaction numbers. We've been doing a fair bit of work at a national level with the likes of Rightmove and other agency networks, just trying to put a marker down a stab as to what's the bullish scenario, bearish scenario, and the UK economy really needs in the order of about 1 million transactions, and there is a school of thought that it could be as low as 750, which will see some casualties in terms of businesses in the market, but the consensus seems to be growing that it could be as high as 1.1, 1.15.
In part, do you think the stamp duty thing has helped that?
Stamp duty has had an effect. Every time the government does interfere in the market, there's usually an effect, adverse effect sometime later. I'm thinking Nigel Lawson with his dual tax relief, property values shot up 50% in 6 months and then plummeted. So we're not going to see any of that. That was a good move. It's given confidence to the market and sustainability. Without being greedy, it would have been nice if it made it for a little bit longer, not for personal individuals, but there is still a housing need. So volume house builders would like to be able to plan ahead, and that doesn't give them quite enough time to be able to make any real plans. But the biggest news that's possibly slipped under the radar is that to first-time buyers buying properties below £300,000, there's no saving at all. And there's again 2 schools of thought on this, but in terms of keeping transaction levels at a healthy level, and keeping the economy going, the 90% mortgages have just been reintroduced. Some might hold their hands up in horror, but I think it will. That will also have a more than a stabilising effect on the market.
I want to ask you about 2 macro trends affecting multiple areas, but particularly Exeter potentially. One is the working from home. That one way or another, more people are going to be spending more time at home. They've already spent a load of time at home, and they've worked their houses hard during that time. As a response, the idea is people may wish better places with more space, which is presumably happy days because that aids the flow of transactions and so on. And the other one, again on a macro point, is the flight from London. that the West in general has always been a recipient of London money, but arguably that's likely to be accelerated. What do you think of those two trends?
I'll take the second one first. The split, perception is often that their buyer will come down from London and be able to pay a lot of money for their property. Now it's not so much about the money, it's about the lifestyle. That flight to the West Country, the balance, the ratio of local buyers to out of area buyers has definitely shifted. Still, most people are going to move within 6 or 7 miles of where they live, but the volume of out of area buyers has nonetheless increased significantly, and that'll only continue. That will only continue. I was going to give a little plug, but we just posted a blog today about the X factor in the marketplace, and that is having a profound effect on activity levels at the minute. I said I'd take the second one first. What was the first one?
And you've forgotten the first one. Very good. Well, I'll make up a completely different one. No, the people will wish better places to live, given they're going to be spending more time there, which will aid the volume of transactions as they move up the chain or out of Exeter to larger places.
Absolutely. People are more exacting, much clearer. They've had time. We've all had time to reflect on our working environment, working practices, but also where we live, how we live. And not more so than people are actually in the process, and not just the thought process, but then accelerating advancing the process of moving. And there's no two ways about it. The very things that you talked about, office work from home, more outside space, these have become significant search factors. I won't go into the detail because we haven't got time, but the search criteria on Rightmove has shifted towards the very things that we're talking about.
Yeah, and one last, perhaps briefly, we've all been struck by the good that people are doing, and you briefly mentioned earlier about when we were chatting about the clients and their response to lockdown, perhaps over the Nightingale Hospital and key workers. Do you want to just reference that, please?
Well, it's something that didn't happen, and God forbid it may happen in the future, but at the start of lockdown, nobody really knew what was going to happen, and there was as Sam mentioned, the Nightingale negotiations, hospital negotiations for West Point that then moved across to Southton, and the perception was that key workers, perhaps to protect shield their families, would be looking for accommodation and not necessarily be able to find it. And I was just really heartened by, and I don't believe that we would be the only business, the only estate agent that asked it, but just from a handful of clients, we produced a list of, it was probably 80 or 90 beds, where small hotels, HMOs, student accommodation, where the owners said, our properties are vacant. If you can find key workers that want to take up that accommodation for free, fill your boots. In the event the demand wasn't there and it wasn't taken up, and as I say, hopefully that won't happen going forward. But that's heartening to know.
But the decency was very much there, and that's been a feature of this pandemic. It's brought out the good that people do. So
absolutely, and just one very quick plug: the charities and community organisations that we work with, along with lots of other businesses, they're crying out for help at the minute. August will be our 25th year. And we're just putting together a plan now to work with other businesses to see how we can help them get back on the feet as well.
Very good. Roger, if I ask you to devidify, if that's a thing, it probably isn't, and we'll bring you back for the panel session. And just to Roger's point, as Stephen is coming forward, our charities have never needed funding and help more so than now, at a time when their own funds are so constrained and when the need is the highest it's ever been. The business of Exeter have been superb in support of charities, and Roger, I know, will be at the forefront of that approach. Stephen, so welcome to this, and talk us through the Met Office's response to this lockdown. You're the Director of Operations and Logistics. That's never been more key in lockdown, presumably.
Yeah, also pretty tricky, actually. I only joined the Met Office in March, so a baptism of fire by any means. And the Met Office is a pretty large organisation, just over 2,000 people, and they're not just in Exeter, they're spread out globally. So there was an initial really clear understand piece around where our people were, who was at risk, and what we needed to do to be able to support them. And we took a really clear approach of well-being first. So how do we make sure all of our people are in a position to keep safe initially? So I joined, and I think about 2 weeks later, I then sent everybody home. And I don't live in Exeter, so it's a little odd being on here. However, I live in North Wales, so I was then myself geographically dispersed from the remainder of the teams to work out exactly how we were going to close things down and make sure that we still were able to do the national capability stuff that we do. So severe weather warnings, flooding. So a lot of what we worked on was around connectivity, maintaining the critical services, which at first needed to be done with people coming into the building, but then built that resilience in terms of technology and systems and support in place to then get people to a safer position as things escalated.
And predominantly people working from home, presumably, or?
Yep, so less, a very small handful of people. We've had almost 100% work from home, and that's generally around maintaining critical infrastructure.
And that must be, that creates a whole load of challenges for any business, whether at one end, morale, communication, culture, but the other, specifically in the Met Office's case, you're self-evidently a very data-led organisation. This would have had issues to do with security, I would imagine.
Security, less so, actually. I think we were already, as an organisation, transitioning to that sort of more cyber security aware anyway. So a lot of the infrastructure was already in process. It obviously gained some significant tempo and traction as things started to progress. And that has been the backbone of the response, enabling our people to work remotely to almost the same standards as they would if they were in the building.
I just wonder what that phrase, gain significant tempo and traction, actually means in practice. It means like you just had to get on with it really quickly. Is that what's happened? Any changes?
So let me unpack that a bit. So there is a comfortable rate of change. I would suggest that businesses will progress a project or program through, and you go through a number of gates at a certain stage and take your time to really understand and do that analysis so you can do your lessons identified. Just sped that process up somewhat to really get to the end product and then do that review slower time, because any bugs and glitchy things were not in the security piece. They were more around how many people can do certain things at certain times. So a capacity thing rather than necessarily a capability thing.
And how about your clients? You've got a rich array of major companies that you supply data for and analysis for. Could you give us a flavour of their response? Not necessarily anything that breaches confidentiality, of course, but how they have been responding and how perhaps if their needs of your services have changed in any way?
So I think the two to call out are defence. So defence still needs to maintain its standard posture. So the things that defence do still required all of those standard products, and we needed to find ways to make sure that we could continue to do that. And my teams were really blessed with the support that both MOD and ourselves took, because we're still governed centrally by the government response, and the view that was taken there around we're going to follow the government guidelines looked and felt fairly similar. Additionally, at the other side of things, where things weren't necessarily going as they would in the normal area, were around civil aviation. So obviously less planes in the sky, and the capability provided there was very much on a scaled back basis, and then a scaling back up as things have obviously increased with cargo and logistics, and now more commercial flights going as well. So very much a either side of the spectrum approach to supporting customers.
What are your working assumptions about going back to the office? When will the buildings be reopened on a major scale, and what sort of proportion will be office based, say this side of Christmas?
It's a really tricky one to answer. So the current position is very much that we look at the government advice and try and understand that and implement that in a really proportional and pragmatic way. To try and answer your question, while there's social distancing, certainly 2 meters where we can maintain it, that would probably look and feel around no more than a third of the people in the building. So some of the approaches that we're taking are around looking at how we can utilize that space and maintain that sort of safety piece for our people, because again the approach was very much around a well-being focus of all of our people, whilst then having options available that were really inclusive, because we have a really diverse population within the Met Office, and it's that standard wicked problem because no one size fits all. So it's having the range of equality and options, but then to generate that equity for all of our people for their individual and personal needs.
Yeah, it's really tricky. There's the logistics of what the business or enterprise needs, what the physical space can permit, how teams work together, whether individuals actually feel comfortable about going back to work, what their childcare needs are, and so on. There's myriad complexities there. So I'm not surprised you can't give a clear answer at this stage. But would you expect it to be something like a sort of a team A in 1 week and team B in another week, that sort of approach, or?
To an extent, I've not necessarily looked at it and approached it in a team A, team B sort of sense. Right. It's very much so the building currently is open on a limited basis for those that have the either wellbeing or productivity needs. So one of the key things that's you may recognise from being an Exeter yourself is that the broadband infrastructure isn't necessarily the greatest in all of the in the sort of outer areas. So that baseline capability to be able to dial in remotely and access some of that more complex and sizable data is quite tricky for some. So there's some learnings in that sort of technical space that we're taking away in terms of baseline capability and enablement, and we've got people in the building that fall into that category, just can't do their day job. We've got the labs, for example, with science that are now open in a socially distanced manner to start doing their research and their science foundation stuff again. So these things are happening. It's the scale at which we do that that is probably the trickiest bit, and you see where the distances are. It is the government guidance is 2 meters where you can, and only by exception 1 meter plus. So we're just watching how those things develop to then take that really clear position, so there's no ambiguity for people.
We all wish clarity, but it's there's a phrase that doubt is uncomfortable, but certainty is an absurdity in current times, and I fear that's the case for many of us. We simply do not yet know enough about certain aspects of how we may return. I want to pick up on one underlying point at the end of this part, which is that quite clearly the pandemic is accelerating pre-existing trends, and one perhaps for you is yet greater collaboration, perhaps the university piece that you mentioned previously.
Yes, certainly. So collaboration with the University of Exeter is a good example. I just went to check to make sure I call it the right thing. So it's the Joint Centre for Excellence in Environmental Intelligence. And that is a piece that's been finalised throughout the lockdown period. So just showing that those things still can take place and still work effectively, just in a slightly different way, and still contribute to world-leading science, and I think that's really powerful. So that particularly around that collaboration space, we're all learning to work and be as effective as we can be with those new constraints and freedoms that are placed upon us.
Stephen, thank you for your time, and we'll call you back for a panel session in a moment, but really good luck to you in what is essentially a new role, and of course an entirely new world. That's tricky personally, but our very best to you in the circumstances. So thank you. Jaye, if we could have you forwards, as it were. Hello.
Hi.
How are you doing? You well?
Yeah, really good, thank you.
Good. Well, all sectors have been affected by the pandemic, one way or t'other, as we all know. But arguably, your world of digital marketing with Launch Online is perhaps more robust than others. Is that fair?
You'd think so, and now more than ever, with everyone online, especially in that kind of peak lockdown period, the numbers of people online were, well, the word is used all the time now, unprecedented. And in fact, you could even see in Google Trends, the searches go up for the word unprecedented, which I'm pretty sure was because people needed to know how to spell it because they were having to use it so much.
So unprecedented, unprecedented itself is unprecedented.
Exactly.
Very meta. I don't know.
Yeah, but what we found, because being a Southwest business, our business started 8 years ago in Cornwall, but 2 years ago we made Exeter our home, and we have a lot of tourism businesses that market through us, that we manage their Google ads and Facebook ads for them, and tourism, of course, was the first thing, along with events, to have the plug pulled on, and that was really difficult for us because we were wanting to support our clients as best we could. And with all of their revenue being cut off, that made then advertising difficult. What we tried to be there was for the clients who did continue to need us, and those that did carry on advertising during lockdown. Even in tourism, one of our largest clients is in the holiday park industry. They are now reaping the rewards of that, and they're ahead of their competitors as a result.
There's quite a lot of detailed analysis that the greater the advertising in tougher times, particularly in such as now, but depressions and so on, recessions, the greater the share of voice and the greater the enduring value. I have to say, all the business of Exeter listening right now, that's an argument we'll be using quite a lot about Exeter living as we return to rude good health in the autumn. It is true that the opportunity to stand out is greater when others are holding back.
Yeah, and quarantining your marketing during a downturn is a difficult thing to do, because to return to full strength then takes longer. That cog takes longer, the machine takes longer to get going, and so it has been interesting to see that kind of peak now coming through, because people were actively searching throughout that whole time. People knew that it was a short term. They didn't know how short it was going to be. They knew they were going to be able to go on holiday again, and they spent that, lots of people were still actively searching during that time.
Have you picked up new business during this time?
Yeah, luckily, yes, through quite a lot of hustling, I think, making sure that... I can
only imagine.
But there have been some businesses that were able to pivot very quickly. One of our new clients that came during the pandemic was a dance company that offered dance classes to children in London. And they moved everything onto Zoom, onto this very platform, and were able to then go global with their dance classes. In 48 hours, we turned around a new Shopify website. We don't really do websites, we do the marketing behind them, but they needed something immediately. And they have been able to keep driving their revenue during lockdown, ready for the returning to being able to do classes in person.
And net, where is your business? When's your financial year? What does it run to?
End of August, and
okay.
Yeah, we had 50% of clients were wanting to pause and just stop with no notice, but luckily it wasn't 50% of our revenue, and through some hustling, some new business wins, I think we're operating at about 20% down.
Right, and then your prognosis for the new financial year, which you're about to be in, what's your take? We're all having problems trying to plan our businesses out over the next 6 months, let alone 12 months.
I think the way that brands handled the pandemic will really ring true with their customers. The way they communicated with their customers, we were all in adversity, and how well people handled it will be remembered. People were very understanding. Customers were very understanding that businesses weren't able to act as normal, and so those that were able to be creative, to pivot, to just be understanding of what the customer's position, I think that they will come through in a stronger position. With all of the things that happen with GDPR and people's customer databases being decimated and maybe mishandling some of that, anybody who's moving out of that into this pandemic with a very small customer database probably struggled more, because new customer acquisition was going to be harder during this period.
And And Jaye, where are you on the scale with your team between furloughed, unfurloughing, potential redundancy, taking on new people and so on? How is Launch Online currently?
So we should have probably furloughed some people, and we decided not to, because our clients are spread out across our 9 team members. If I'd furloughed anyone, yes, we would have saved costs, and yes, our revenue was reduced, so we had that need to furlough. But those remaining customers that were with their account managers, they would have had to be moved to another account manager, and those team members would have had to work twice as hard with then staff on furlough. So I decided to take the hit. We're a limited company. I'm there's 2 directors, and I made the decision. I prefer to take the hit and keep all team members active with a reduced workload. And we didn't even have to cut pay. Interestingly, though, the team volunteered things like that. They volunteered reducing their hours, cutting their pay, and I was very lucky. Well, I made an active decision to just reduce our profits and take a hit so that we could support the customers that chose to stay with us. You know, this customer at the heart of everything you do, that's in a service business, that's the same for us. And the way that some of our customers treated us and we treated them back in return showed this wonderful human empathy, and it made it a pleasure to do business. And it's why actually, I was a judge on as you know, with the Exeter Living Awards. I found the process really interesting, and I became much more connected to our headquarters in Exeter. I felt much more aware of what was going on in the city and the surrounding areas. And as a result, we're going to be sponsoring the Digital Exeter Conference in September, and really feeling much more connected with where we are locally, although we do business globally.
For about half a second through that sentence, I thought you were about to say, and as a result, we're going to be sponsoring the Exeter Living Awards.
Maybe next time, maybe.
You are a very front-footed character, but I wouldn't deem it trying to pitch you live in front of everyone. But we ought to have a conversation, you know. The value of local businesses connecting deeply at an emotional level, which promotes business. Come on, there's a story there. Jaye, for now, if you stay on, we're going to bring back the other panelists for a quick last few questions. And I'd ask you each to perhaps sum up what you think your clients and your customers' responses. You've touched on this to some extent already, but their confidence going into next year. Where would you try to sort of estimate the Exeter particularly? I know that's more difficult for you, Stephen, but Exeter businesses' level of confidence about the economy currently and into next year.
We'll jump in at once.
Well, maybe we will have the dogs answering this one. They sound pretty voluble.
The response that we're getting from people planning ahead for the rest of this year and to next year augurs well. Of course, nobody knows what's ahead of us, and you said we may be looking at an entirely different scenario in 10 days' time, let alone 10 weeks' time. But certainly all the pointers at the minute, there is more than room for optimism.
Our other panelists, are you optimistic that Exeter will bounce back?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people in Devon and Exeter are resilient, and they're also innovative. And I think that we see that in our cities especially. You know, we're often the first to pioneer things, and I think that gives us a real head start when tackling this type of issue. And I think we will continue to do that and to adapt. And we are a city that takes quality of living and has always made that a priority. And I think that will help with tackling issues that COVID has presented us.
I would agree. I would agree, and I'd say that we've been very lucky to be in this part of the world, in this part of the UK, you know, during this period, you know, with access to lovely green open spaces, and from a mental health point of view, we are in a part of the country where we've been able to probably be afforded more freedom, which has been interesting. I think my clients are feeling quite optimistic, sector specific, and we're recruiting. So people of Exeter in the digital world, you know, there are jobs going.
Stephen, talking about jobs going, as a major employer in the area, you've presumably pretty much always got vacancies. Do you think there's anything It's a bit of a leading question, but I'll say it anyway. Do you think there's anything inherent about Exeter that makes it even more attractive now compared with other places for your potential recruits?
It's an interesting and tricky question. What I'd say is, from adversity comes opportunity, and the opportunities seem certainly to outweigh the adverse effects. I think, you know, the term pivot's been used. I think adaptability, resilience is all in there. Yeah, from a people perspective, I grew up in the southwest. I think the southwest of the country has a lot to offer. Hence the reason I'm Met Office now. Slowly working my way back down there from my military days, and I think there's a lot more going forward into what the future world might look like that is offered by the region than maybe others that are slightly more built up. Because I think that now we've proven that, you know, being geographically dispersed from the big hubs are you know, no longer prerequisites for success. Actually, I think, you know, the opportunity to live somewhere that has those broader offerings of, you know, work-life balance and places to go, I think is going to be a wider draw and much stronger.
And I can only imagine, from your point of view, Roger, when it comes to luring Londoners down to the West Country, down to Exeter, to your properties and so on, that combination of the work-life balance, which has been ever more important in recent times, plus the digital opportunity to work from home, means you're in a reasonably sweet spot, I'd have thought.
I think, without being complacent about it, because this pandemic is not going away anytime soon, but that's why I think there's more than room for optimism. We're seeing, not just out of town, out of area buyers, but we're seeing, possibly like you, Stephen, people just getting back to the roots. So once you've experienced Devon and Cornwall, you're going to come back, and spread the word as well. So there was a time that Exeter and the West Country were not the poor relations, but certainly weren't right up there at the top of the property hotspots. It damn well is now.
We were speaking to some clients in Cardiff recently, and they're making a similar point about the probably the wrong expression, but the homing pigeon sense that people coming back to their hometowns, and it's almost as though, without getting too existential about it, this brush with mortality that we've all had has prompted us to think more deeply about ourselves and what really matters. Hence, you know, coming back home, as it were.
Stephen's hit the nail on the head that you can work from home.
Yes.
So we've got clients now that are coming back down on their London wages because they're keeping their job in London and living here. So they're getting the best of everything.
Yeah, we've had an observation from Laura Wright. Rather kindly, she says, which reflects well on all of you. This has been really useful to hear from these panellists. Thank you. I've had a lot of takeaways. She leads a music academy in Exeter, which is semi-independent and relies on our ability to recruit new people to the academy. The marketing angle, she agrees with you, Jaye. She is concerned about the performance arts being so unstable at the moment, and that is, you know, there's no immediate antidote to that for all of the government's 1.5 billion 10 days back or so. But her specific point is, with plans to return to offices, face-to-face evaluations and visits and so on, are the panellists having to plan A, B, C and D to account for the varying possibilities regarding local lockdowns, further national lockdowns? Can you proceed with certainty, given this is an era of uncertainty?
I think particularly for us with the show, and I mean, you know, performing arts, and I really feel for what Laura's put there about being in limbo, because we have felt like that, and certainly the event organisers that we're talking to on a daily basis about whether they can run their event in September, October, November this year. It's a really difficult time because there is no hard and fast end to this, and we don't know whether there's going to be a second spike, whether things are going to settle, whether we're going to be living with this kind of regulation for a long time. And for those of us that are in events and the performing arts, it's really tough to try and make any hard and fast plans. We've got to be flexible, and we've got to be ready to get going as soon as the green light is given to us. But at the moment, it's very hard, and I can really sympathise about being in limbo, because we talk to people all the time, and even with our own show, we feel the same at the moment.
One of the sort of paradoxes of the pandemic is that we've never been further apart yet closer still, and it's the wonders of Zoom and Teams and all else that does that. But one of the other things that relates to that is that lockdown has made so much of everything more local, that we're more aware of our locales, we've walked them, we've looked around them, we haven't had much else to do, but we've got a deeper sense and perhaps deeper love of our local areas, including our local businesses. And quite clearly, the independents have been so important in all respects, societally, the living culture and so on. Do you buy the argument that sense of locality and localness will endure the other side, or is this just a manifestation of us being cooped up in our homes? Who'd like to take that one?
I'll take it.
You're a thoughtful man. Do you want to take that?
I think it's one of those that it forms part of your identity after a while, does it not? Ironically, says the West Country guy coming back to the West Country to work eventually. So it's one of those that I think absolutely it will just strengthen those those deep-rooted ties. But also what it's done as has been articulated in pretty much everybody's piece. It says about why the area has such strong draws, and you appreciate the things that maybe you wouldn't have had time or maybe the bandwidth to appreciate in the past, in a slightly different way and in a different context, of course. So I think it's only a positive thing in that regard.
Jaye, connecting more deeply locally, your service is digital, which of course is transnational, whatever. But in terms of the engagement that your teams have and so on, do you buy the idea that local will matter more?
Yes, and being generous as well. That you might pay £1 more for whatever it is that you're buying by buying local, but that there's a more of a connection to what you're buying, and that you might buy it less frequently or it's better quality. I also think I've just volunteered for a mentoring program, and this idea of kind of giving back, I think is much more embraced now, and what your wider impact is of the choices that you make. I really hope all of those things will endure, and I hope enough people, it becomes part of their everyday nature. I've found networking on Zoom and doing these kind of things, it's opened up my world to other local businesses that right now I'm in Barnfield Crescent, just by Princess Hay. And I come here in my car and I leave and I go back to near Tiverton where I live. Whereas now I feel that that I should be going out and meeting more of these businesses, and I hope that all will endure.
Just to amplify that point, all businesses have been affected, many quite severely, by this pandemic and the immediate aftermath of it. All those businesses need your support, our support, more than ever previously. Now is the time to support the local independents, that one way or another, that flow of money through the economy, if we as individuals are not getting out there and spending and supporting and so on, we won't get it back in either. But those businesses, those independents need your support, hospitality and retail most particularly. Roger, any last thoughts in this area?
I'll just echo that, but as you say, reinforce it in that out of this, what did you say, Stephen? Out of adversity comes opportunity. There is an opportunity for businesses local businesses to really fight back and reclaim that share of the market in whatever sector they're in, and it'll be the likes of Jaye and Launch Online that can help them, because everybody's habits are going to change, and then we're not going back to where we were. And if we do, it'll be a sad day, but it'll take a long time. So local businesses should be grabbing the opportunity by the throat. It's hard because we're having tough times, both individually and as businesses. But there is an opportunity now for the hashtag Exeter together to become a thing.
Very good. Very good. Appreciate that. We are, it's a bit of a cliche, we are all in it together, but we really are all in it together. I've just noticed I've got one more question, see if I can get this in. What's this question here? No, I don't think we'll. Oh yeah, it's Laura just supporting the county show, which is very good. So she missed it this year. I'm sure, like all of us, she's really looking forward to it next year. The last question, last observation is this: it's been really touching to see how the people and businesses of Exeter have been creating clever ways to support and help each other where they can. And we've been sharing those, as Roger's just touched on, with our hashtag Exeter Together through Exeter Living, our emails and our social media and so on. We absolutely encourage you to do it because we all need buoying up. But I think we have a couple of tales of the good that people do. I'm going to ask Sam first and then Jaye to round off. Sam, tell us yours.
Well, we had a plan for this year's show. It was going to be our 125th show, and we were going for a Guinness World Record of the longest piece of knitted bunting. We needed to knit something like 7 kilometres of it. As soon as it went into lockdown, people just started knitting like crazy, and we were getting boxes and boxes of bunting delivered. And in the end, we laid it out in the hall at West Point. It covered the whole floor and it measured 16 kilometres. So we absolutely smashed the world record. And people just loved the fact that we'd given them a purpose with their knitting, and it was raising money for our charity of the year, the Addington Fund, and it was just fantastic. People really bought into it. They loved doing it, and in lockdown, when they didn't know what else they were going to do with their time, they just knitted like mad, and it was just great.
Absolutely lovely. I mean, who knew that out of that sort of diversity comes that sort of strange opportunity, and something which is, I guess, of itself therapeutic and interesting and so on, but which aids charity. So from a marketing point of view, yet further puts the Devon County Show map. Sam, thank you for that. Jaye, your tale is rather different.
We work with a lot of SMEs, and one of the Southwest businesses we work with was facing a difficult time in lockdown. Their products weren't selling as much, but they sell massive pants. And the demand dipped for massive pants for a while, and the factory that they use in Italy use the material that they make the pants out of to make face coverings. And they were able to pivot and very quickly, within just 48 hours, get this onto their website and drive sales through this new demand for face masks and face coverings. And it was just wonderful to see how quickly they could adapt, and how they didn't, panic too much. And yeah, from massive pants to face masks.
From massive pants to face masks, there has to be some pun in there that just escapes me, probably. But on that bombshell, or maybe actually should be bombshell probably, if that's a thing. On that bombshell, we are going to finish, and I would like to give our thanks to our panel today, to Sam Mackenzie-Green for the Devon County Show. Sam, thank you. Roger Wilkinson Grant, thank you. Stephen Marshall, the Met Office, and enjoy your sojourn in Wales, but enjoy your time in the Southwest when you come back down even more, I'm sure. And Jaye, Cowle of Launch Online, thank you very much, and I greatly look forward to your sponsorship of the Exeter Living Awards. so happy. Thank you. Thank you to all of you for your time today. Please check our forthcoming business surgeries that we'll be running. Look out for the Exeter Property Awards, and our comms are coming soon on that. Good luck to all of you navigating these unimagined, perhaps unprecedented times. Let's hold to the belief that enduring good can come from this. This has been a Media Clash production, and this has been the Exeter Living Business Club. Thank you very much. Exeter together. Thank you.
Good work, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers.